you. So I'm just going to introduce our second speaker, Harshavardhan Bhat. He's a PhD researcher with the Monsoon Assemblages project at the University of Westminster. He's currently working on monsoon air and urbanism, focusing on New Delhi. Harsh is interested in the study of politics, the infrastructural condition, air and the Anthropocene. He's an alumnus of the 2015-16 postgraduate program on the city at the Strelka Institute for Media, Architecture and Design in Moscow, and holds an MSc in comparative politics from the London School of Economics. Harsh was also previously a fellow with the Jindal School of International Affairs in New Delhi and has managed political consulting projects in South India and Rwanda. He will now present his paper titled Complicit Unknowns.
Yeah. Thanks, Beth, for the introduction. It's always nice to be introduced. Anyway, I have a disclaimer, and this is in solidarity with your post-lunch condition, that this is a reading, and it's a reading to tame my madness, but also to tame the time that I have. So what I have, in solidarity to keep you awake, are a sequence of GIFs for you to gaze at while I talk about this stuff. My paper is titled Complicit Unknowns, and it's a bunch of different things. And a lot of this is object-oriented ontology. A lot of this is reading with Haraway, reading with Sloterdijk, reading with Latour, even thinking with Lindsay and David Chandler, who are my supervisors. So there's a lot of influences in what's happening here. But more importantly, the paper is trying to theorize from Bangalore. And I think that's where I'd rather leave for an introduction to continue later on in the questions to see what happens in this text. So I discuss in Complicit Unknowns the entanglement of the complicit and the unknown in co-producing a perception of phenomena or fiction that binds people into an everyday fabric to sustain meaning. This paper is essentially about the stories we tell ourselves to sustain an epic violence through the little deeds of living beautifully. You should note that in this experimentation, I'm not working with precarity and vulnerability. There is no doubt that the exposure to violence is relative and not everybody and everything is affected by violence in the same way. But I choose to sympathize with the third substance that transcends the first object and the second subject and gives rise to a form and a presence that makes the world of objects and bodies live, and I'm indeed talking about the air. I'm trying to state in Complicit Unknowns that there seems to be almost this highly confused systemic of relations in how people, even politically in certain contexts, think about the air, which cannot simply be framed as a project of othering or of oppression and precarity, but really a combination of forces and forced living, which gives people an agency to dispose responsibility to the air and complain at the same time for the catastrophic suffering of a toxic air and the complained body. But we don't occupy a world of an unpolitical air. The air is goddamn political. I don't mean to just say that for us in as to how Arvind Kejriwal, the Chief Minister of Delhi, and Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, talk about clean air. I'm saying the air's got its politics, and we have no damn idea how to read it. While the air does not seem to care for our appreciation, it surely does understand that we don't know how to listen. We smell, but we don't breathe. If anything, human life and advanced capitalism, the term as used by Rosi Braidotti in particular, educate the air of its collaborative potential to cloud seed, fart, distribute toxins, burn materials, all kinds of materials for energy, warmth, fun, violence, pleasure, manufacturing settlements, harvesting, agriculture, and so on. By now, you might have sensed that I am not necessarily an optimist, but the air forces us to believe that the ultimate goal is not catastrophe. It forces us by inventing new modes of communication, the fog, the dust allergy, the cough, humidity that causes a rash, extinction, bacterial rains, red rains, pink rains, acidic rains, airs that carry sodium and potassium, dust of worlds, of other worlds. If there's anything you can imagine, in the right set of circumstances, the air can carry it. We now know, thanks to further recent connections made by Brent Christner's program at Louisiana State University, that even living organisms, airborne microbes, bacteria, algae, fungi, can catalyze molecular water formations at temperatures close to freezing, up in the sky, producing clouds, distributing rain. If you thought that the harvests of the ground had no connection with the harvests of the air, these are times to deeply reconsider things, especially when corporations get worried about seeds, intellectual property, and crossing borders, and weather scientists get worried about post-industrial Tibetan skies, finding material life in landscapes in central India. Mark Wigley and Beatrix Colomina, in their book, Are We Human?, argue that if the human, and I quote, if the human is a designing animal and the earth is its design studio, this animal is not a unique and distinct creature moving and thinking within the vast studio. The figure of the human is not sharply defined. It is part of the living earth that it designs in, just as the living earth is part of it. End of quote. I think there's a problem in our collective comfort in the very idea of being buried and getting decomposed as bodies when they occupy a post-life, in the sense that while compost is organic, what would it mean to situate death if our bodies were cremated into the air? What if the political apparatus of our minds, with their relation to solid beneath, is mirrored to the skies? Airs above us and airs around us. What if we acknowledge for a moment that a death through the air is ultimately a death distributed in air and that you're breathing it? My intent here is not to cite cultures and rituals around death that look at bodies differently, not at all, but to really provoke a humanitarian solidarity with the grand alien object of the air, which seems to be working in a very different time compared to the rest of us. It's almost like we need a whole new language, a whole new dance to reveal a political dance. A whole new dance to reveal a political form that can be manufactured for the sake of our own future. In the city of Bangalore, several weeks ago, Bellanduru Lake caught fire. The air was screaming at the human consensus, and all that the media could do was to say that the people who paid millions for those apartments had to suffer, and that the foams the lake dispersed troubled motorists. Motorists and people who pay for apartments was democracy. Bellanduru Lake, like one of the many hundreds of lakes, through an advanced formal system of actions, has been encroached and entrenched with real estate and industrial level dumping. Oops. Yeah, there we go. And there's a problem with the very concept of the Anthropocene here. Not that we're not living in the scene, but the way the scene is taught in reference to time is deeply problematic in developing a politics for the Anthropocene itself. What I'm really trying to say is that the Anthropocene cannot be inferred as a substance, even if it's a site of a monster. It's conceptually a time, but it's not necessarily a material, even though it's a world of stuff. It's about the anthros, but it is also about the current systems and energies that are empowering objects in a world of actionable post-anthros, where the body does but little to deep dive into complicity, and this is where Complicit Unknowns is given birth to as a concept. So a politics for the Anthropocene requires a different understanding of time in engaging with what the Anthropocene is and could be, because it's only through a different epistemology of time can we possibly unpack the currency that a visible time holds waiting to be engaged with. What would that political encounter with the air look like? Does the air view days and nights like we do? Does the air, like the river, dry out during summer? Does the air care what temperature it is? Does the air even percolate from the ground? Does it sleep at all? Trees apparently do. What would that political encounter look like? I don't mean this in a humanist sense necessarily, but my provocation this evening really is to invite you to think with the air and possibly see what that could be like. An air that is not singled out to any one particular experience of its being, on your body and life, but an air that is living in a fundamentally different experience of time that you and I occupy. What does this all mean? As Harshavardhan notes, and I quote, "It matters what thoughts think thoughts, it matters what knowledges know knowledges, it matters what relations relate relations, it matters what worlds. It matters what stories tell stories," end of quote. and that's the Harrier reference, the tentacular. Political times are short, normally center around 4, 5, or more erratic life cycles these days. Industrial timelines far more extensive, often spanning generations. Based on whose education theory you listen to, cognitive socials, in reference to the universe of ideas people subscribe to, are also fairly erratic, but arguably between a political time and an industrial time is where you find these rapid outbursts. So we do live in a phenomenological time, a time that starts far before we were born and plays on far beyond death. So should the air care at all for the President of the United States to scrub the EPA? Should it care for the Modi government to liberalize landscapes for surveilled smart cities? Should it care that you paid your carbon tax of the flight you're using? But wait, this is only one form of linearity. Let's push this further. Linearity and dissociation are the only two forms of political complicity available for purchase today. Architecture, as it is only showing us how to shield further, how to defend yourself, how to occupy comfortable spaces fitted with air conditioners. Politics is not doing any better. Politics, depending on who you're listening to again, is playing by the rule book of forgotten gods and living ghosts. To the comfort that a certain life form of networks and linear nodes provides us, we're able to feed a universe of energies to whatever you want to call them. Capitalist purpose, neoliberal acting, the fight against normative loneliness, the production of agricultural life, the collective prayer to gods, the technological manipulation of sight and smell, speculation, or as Rossi Braidotti calls it, advanced capitalism. A politics for the air requires one to shift and holds one's breath for a moment to resituate life in the air and see what that really means. Because the weather, if anything, is a speculation. Again, speculation. Industrial, cosmological, ecological, spirological, hydrological, pardon the Sloterdijk reference, responding to the pushes and pulls to a very different orchestration of time. And this is where the theoretical magic begins, as this really becomes an issue of communication, for those who have seen the movie Arrival, with another force, substantial and with its own life. So while a politics of profit produces business schools, and a politics of democracy produces electoral ballots, a politics for the air needs a construct, a language that can be used for the system, democracy, organization, etc., the democracy to speak to air, and most importantly, a sensibility for the system, or this democracy to sense what the air is trying to say. And that could perhaps even save democracy's life. This is not to in any way whatsoever say that nature exists, or to say that if it did exist, that it's not prone to manipulation, sure. But all I'm trying to say is that whatever this politics of the situated Anthropocene could be, there's got to be a way for a conversation to exist. Kejriwal's odd-even scheme in New Delhi works temporarily. Sadiq Khan's policies for clean air will work temporally. Electric buses are comparatively silent and green walls feel good when you get out of the tube station. But does the politics for an air require the purchase of more air purifiers, more air conditioners, window meshes, air purifying plants? Is this a politics of material acquisition or material manipulation? And I think that is where questions for co-productions lie. It is in this economics that it seems to me that a consumerist, neoliberal, international relations of exchange dominate the humble agency of government, and not to mention real estate. Last page. My grandmother used to sit out in this open porch in front of her lands, and on a random setting evening, she'd say the rains would arrive. Her nose was one with the monsoonal winds. It was like the wind spoke to her, like the guy gazing at the skies. And she was never wrong, partly because the monsoons were regular, and even when on that odd year it didn't arrive, she'd sensed that. She was a woman of the soil, but she was also listening to the birds and the cows and the general transitions of life that enabled her to read her little world to relative form of comfortable accuracy. But her world was not really too little. It was changing. And as what Timothy Morton called, it was becoming a part of a larger hyperobject in bed with other global conspiracies that people could simply not see and comprehend. So her illusion was fairly quickly destabilized through her lifetime. The ecosystem changed, and so did she. She started saying these days, and that's where the complicit unknown concept has links on to another, the concept of the Anthropocene as these days, that these days is really the concept by which people deal with what the Anthropocene could possibly be. It's part of Iganakala, and Iganakala in my dialect of Kannada means these days. She would say, Malekala, rainy season, rainy time, is part of, erratic Malekala is Iganakala. That's how it is these days. These days, these things happen. These days is politics. These days is how I think the environment is. So if you ask me what design could do, I go back to what David Chandler says about design, that, and I quote, design seems to come to the fore because it tells us the truth of something being simulated, end of quote. Like I landed in London and I discovered that I stopped sneezing. I land in Delhi and I start sneezing. It wasn't just the floating cement dust, wasn't just the dark horizontal cloudburst of bus deposits on your face as vengeance against your walking body. It wasn't just the humidity that packaged particulates with affection, making things heavy inside your lungs, making you cough, making your eyes go red. The air was having a conversation with my privilege. It was telling me there was a problem. Hundreds die every winter in Delhi because of homelessness and the pressures that the environment puts on their bodies. There's a beautiful film on this that recently screened called Cities of Sleep. Anti-allergens dominate the pharmacy business in Bangalore and Delhi. So is the presence of these airs, winter or monsoonal, complicit to nourishment or violence? And what do we politically satisfy in unleashing a catastrophe, not just for the rights of humans, but of the very concept of life broadly, and for the other things that breathe the same air, even if they are not living? I wonder what my grandmother thought when she spoke of Iganakala, because this device of these days, Iganakala, in the urban frame, is a random gathering of objects, people, feelings about gods, politicians, cars, jobs, nature, circumstance, computers, roads, commercial behavior, immersing into an ever-growing list of possibilities. This could just go on and on, depending on who's suffering. So the wells go dry, the rains stop short, the winds carry dust, the highways flood, lakes burn, and cars scuff. Every scene is a complicit unknown. The air leverages democracy into a severe state of cognitive dissonance, and my fundamental argument here is that air compresses democracy to explode. It frankly does not give a shit to the linearity of democracy's surface and its interventions. The lines that democracies draw to engage with the air are but material towers that can do little but gaze at the aesthetic distraction of local consequences, and thus an unfortunate job even at making the consequence of the locals suffer. The best that political policy does is the best that Starbucks does. That Rainforest Alliance is going to save the world. But we don't need Zizek to prove that wrong. So if the air speaks to the worlds of the anthros in a different time, haven't we gotten this all wrong? There is no one single political interaction with the air. The air is there no matter what. It's complicit to everything. There is no complicity to be made or seen without the air. We dissect the air into elementalities of the wind, the rain, the clouds, dark, bright blue, dust, and so much more. And in a hurry to neoliberalize linearity in these engagements, we have forgotten that an air even exists. Air compresses industrial suffering into a schizophrenic politics of diffusion where a chronic sinus is biologically and phenomenologically entangled with why the parrots have disappeared. So the air politically requires an epistemology that is brave enough to connect your leaking sinus with the future of the parrots that conquered your flat balcony when you were young. Full stop.